Tell me then, Creator, what the peanut was made for. We have been encouraged by an American scientist, farmer George Washington Carver, and his testimony of how he over and over again went to the Creator and asked him to teach him what the peanut was for. In fact, Carver firmly believed in Jesus' words, "I am the vine and my Father is the vine dresser." One of the most important things that George Washington Carver learned was to hear God speak to him and to teach him how to make products from the peanut. As a result, Carver was able to help the farmers of the South in ways that no other person has been able to single-handedly so. Sustenance agriculture to business agriculture. Agriculture is dominated today by those who deny God's existence or ownership of all creation, or by those who live as though God doesn't impact our lives or the way we farm. So many atrocities are perpetrated against the natural world, and the natural laws are violated in the agricultural sector. Nehemiah, book of Nehemiah, chapter 13, verse 15, we read, "In those days I saw in Judah some who were treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in sacks of grain and loading them on donkeys, as well as wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads. And they brought them into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So I admonished them on the day they sold food." Though human history dominated most of the time in accordance with the Creator's mandate, opted to do sustenance agriculture, but recently in pursuit of profit, humans opted to business agriculture. The so-called Green Revolution, which started in 1960s, has set a stage for this trend. With the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries, Green Revolution in 1960s, traditional systems came under pressure. Agriculture became more mechanized and more market-oriented to meet the demand for food from the new industrial towns. Since the 1960s, the amount of food produced through this type of agriculture has increased drastically, and currently there is enough food produced to feed every human on the earth. Although industrialized agriculture has been successful in producing large quantities of food, the future of food production is in jeopardy due to problems that persist in this type of agriculture. On the last 100 years, around 3/4 of the world's known plant species have been lost. There were 30,000 varieties of rice, for example, growing in India at the start of the 20th century. Today, around 3/4 of India's rice crops comes from 10 varieties. According to the Global Biodiversity Assessment of the United Nations Environment Program, 5 to 20% of plant species are threatened with extinction in the foreseeable future, unless present trends in the agricultural field are reversed. Here is the quote from Masanobu Fukuoka: "There is no time in modern agriculture for a farmer to write a poem or compose a song." So industrial farming doesn't have any good record. Sustenance farming had very good record. So now we come to the section D, agriculture, the most endangered and dangerous profession. One of the oldest professions of the world, agriculture is under siege. Perhaps Prophet Isaiah's words can capture the gravity of the present condition that persists in the agricultural sector. "I will lay it waste. It will not be pruned or hoed, but briars and thorns will come up. I will also charge the clouds to rain no rain on it." Isaiah chapter 5 verse 6. If we scan the planet, immediately we can see the effects of these profound words such as slash and burn agriculture, chemical inputs, soil erosion, and desertification. Worldwide, around 3 million hectares of agricultural land are lost each year because the soil degrades and becomes unusable due to erosion. An additional 4 million hectares are lost each year when agricultural land is converted and used for highways, housing, factories, and other urban needs. Pope Francis writes in the paragraph number 61, agriculture has caused so much of damage. You know that. If we scan the regions of our planet, we immediately see that humanity has disappointed God's expectations. Those are strong words. Today, farmers make up more than 65% of the workforce. The agrarian community makes up 85%. This is only farming 65%, who depend directly on agriculture, and in India 70% of the people directly linked to farming. Early humans colonized the Indian subcontinent, and 10,000 years ago, as the hunters and gatherers lifestyle yielded to settlement, agriculture, rise of villages and towns, humans found new ways to cultivate the land. As Jeremiah puts it in 29 chapter verse 5, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat of their produce. As a result, India flourished, and Indus civilizations like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Lothal, Dolavera stand today as the symbols of human progress and ingenuity. Enriched by agricultural economy, these great cities perhaps are witness to the biblical assumption of progress and development, but also failure and collapse. As Proverbs chapter 28 verse 19 puts it, he who tills his land will have plenty of food, but he who follows empty pursuits will have poverty in plenty. We all know, however, that farming is not some old-fashioned occupation that will fade away with the arrival of engineers, teachers, and doctors. Production of food is essential to the survival of our economy, and there will always be a need for those who work the soil, as it is demonstrated vividly in India. However, Indian agriculture is facing a number of problems. Indian soils have been used for growing crops over thousands of years without caring much for replenishing. This has led to depletion and exhaustion of soils, resulting in their low productivity. The average yield of almost all the crops in India are amongst the lowest in the world. Biblical curse seem to haunt also the Indian farmer. Genesis chapter 3 verse 17 to 19. And unto Adam he said, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shall you eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shall you eat bread, till you return unto the ground, for out of it was you taken, for dust you are, and unto dust shall you return. I think this curse has fallen on the Indian farmer. In other words, Indian farmers are cursed. Other problems like small and fragmented land holdings, seed loss, fertilizers, biocides, lack of irrigation, lack of mechanization, soil erosion, climate change, absence of markets, and scarcity of capital have driven the Indian farmer to the brink of abandonment of farming. For example, land in New Delhi is more than 10 times expensive as that in Tokyo, and 50 times more expensive than that in Kuala Lumpur. Rural communities in both developed and developing countries are therefore facing hardships and decline. Unprecedented numbers of farmers are confronting insurmountable financial burdens, and from British shepherds to Indian cotton farmers are seeing suicide as their only way out. Unable to cope up with the existing agricultural practices, between 1994 and 2004, almost 300,000 farmers committed suicide in India. From the start to finish line, Indian farmers face off innumerable problems. With the commercialization of agriculture, the Indian farmer is being drawn slowly but steadily into the sphere of influence of markets, both national and international. But the Indian farmer has neither the ability nor the organization to protect his own interest in the competitive market. The result is that in most cases, the Indian farmer is unable to secure a fair price for his produce. It is found in the book, The Economics of Indian Agriculture, written by Narayanasamy and Narasimha. 800 years before Christ, Prophet Isaiah has captured the archetypal plight of farmers that is similar to our situation. Isaiah chapter 5 verse 2. He dug it all around, removed its stones and planted it with the choicest vine, and he built a tower in the middle of it, and also hewed out a wine vat in it. Then he expected it to produce good grapes, but it produced only worthless ones. In Andhra Pradesh, India, for example, a series of suicides among peasant farmers began with cotton producers who, encouraged by the promise of high returns, planted large areas with a single cotton hybrid that proved to be particularly susceptible to insect attack. Faced with uncontrollable pest outbreak and insurmountable loans, many farmers resorted to killing themselves by drinking the insecticide intended for their field. Now I ask a very important question. Who will take responsibility for these agricultural crimes? We know the perpetrators, we know their addresses, we know their phone numbers, emails, WhatsApp, and so on and so forth. We need to bring them to justice, those who are responsible for these crimes. Book of Exodus sheds some light on this. Exodus chapter 22, verse 6. If a fire breaks out and spreads to the thorn bushes, so that stacked grain or the standing grain or the field itself is consumed, he who started the fire shall surely make restitution. We hook the farmers in developing countries in the Western style of agriculture, then they are doomed because it is not sustainable and the environment can't stand it. As we all know, energy and chemical intensive agriculture is inherently unsustainable. A report sponsored by the World Bank found that many water sources are being polluted by the excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides. Agricultural productivity and food supplies are at risk because of increasing water scarcity and soil degradation. In the situations like this, the farmer had the access to agrarian theology, we could have saved number of farmers from suicide. Perhaps the following text from the Bible could have provided some respite to the vulnerable farmers who were facing the inevitable. In fact, these type of texts abound throughout the Bible. We read from the Habakkuk chapter 3, 17-19. Though the fig tree should not blossom and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold and there be no cattle in the stalls, Yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds' feet, and makes me walk on my high places. According to FAO figures compiled from National Consensus Statistics, there are around 385 million farms in Asia, Africa 36 million, Central America 6 million, and South America 10 million. There are therefore approximately 437 million farms in developing countries, from which 3 billion people make a living. While most small-scale farms are cultivated by traditional methods, a substantial number, possibly over 40%, have adopted chemically intensive agricultural methods. By 2050, the world's population will reach 9 billion, 34% higher than today. Nearly all of this population increase will occur in developing countries like India and China. This is not surprising, since 75% of the poor in developing countries live in rural areas, and their incomes are directly or indirectly linked to agriculture. However, farming is a life-giving profession. Psalm 85 puts it, "Yes, the Lord shall give that which is good, and our land shall yield her increase." But among the plethora of problems that agriculture is facing today, if the absence of any religious rationale or agrarian theology persists, the solutions employed by politics, science, and technology would render them futile. Faith and values, for example, act as relatively stable guiding principles that enable individuals to evaluate situations, end stakes, or modes of conduct in terms of desirability, and so could promote acceptance or rejection of contentious or potentially risky processes like unsustainable agricultural practices promoted by Green Revolution. Hence, I argue that the influence of religion could be very influential in the acceptance of agricultural profession as a noble one, which could set off on a path of sustainability. Besides, faith in the Creator has its own advantages, and therefore we recommend the same to all the farmers around the world, as indicated in the book of Deuteronomy. "And if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, he will give the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the later rain, that you may gather in your grain and your wine and your oil, and he will give grass in your fields for your livestock, and you shall eat and be full." Deuteronomy chapter 11. Now we come to the section E, Christian religious rationale or agrarian theology. Christian values towards the environment are diverse. Different traditions with their religious rationale, for example, emphasize different aspects of the creation narratives. Most of the attention focused on branches of the church that emphasize texts such as Genesis chapter 1, 26 to 28. This states that humans were given a divine edict to have dominion over the earth and increase in number. Perhaps this type of radical religious rationale paved way to capitalism, practical relativism, colonialism, and finally gave rise to industrial revolution and green revolution. Even though it originated from the Christian West, very soon it established its foothold even in the East, and it left its aftermath in the agricultural sector around the world, and especially it was demonstrated so vividly in Indian agriculture. The recent 3 lakh farmer suicides in India and its associated agricultural problems could be directly or indirectly linked to the radical religious rationale in his recent encyclical Laudato Si. Pope Francis echoes a similar opinion. Laudato Si 67. Genesis account which grants man dominion over the earth has encouraged the unbridled exploitation of nature by painting him as domineering and destructive by nature. Although it is true that we Christians have at times incorrectly interpreted the scriptures, nowadays we must forcefully reject the notion that our being created in God's image and giving dominion over the earth justifies absolute domination over other creatures. However, other traditions, especially among liberal and Protestant denominations, teach divinely sanctioned stewardship. That is chapter 2, 7 to 15, where humans are put in Eden to care for and till the earth. The biblical text states about human responsibility for environmental protection. The text frames our response in terms of theocentric beliefs, with humans having the God-given role as guardians with responsibility to care for creation. Focus is placed on scriptures promoting harmony and stewardship. Genesis 2:15 observes that guardianship was not quite a right of rule, but a case of privileged position, where humans, because of their knowledge, had a unique responsibility to care for creation. As Psalm 85 declares that a farmer is blessed abundantly by the Lord for the wise stewardship of the land. Yeah, the Lord shall give that which is good, and our land shall yield her increase. Psalm 85. Pope Francis provides a perfect explanation on the sustainable agriculture. Pope Francis, already I read it for you, I can read one more time. Tilling can be understood refers to cultivating, plowing or working, while keeping means caring, protecting, overseeing and preserving. This implies a relationship of mutual responsibility between human beings and nature. Each community can take from the bounty of the earth whatever it needs for subsistence, but also has the duty to protect the earth and to ensure its fruitfulness for coming generations. Laudato Si 67. Tilling can be understood also as an activity of sustenance of the present generation. Keeping it can be an act of hope or an act of conservation, that is, keeping resources in working condition for the future generations. Apostle St. Paul, writing Colossians, reminds us that, yes, for our sake it was written, because the plowman ought to plow in hope, and the thresher to thresh in hope of sharing of crops. If we want to glorify God, we must be Christian farmers, not just farmers who are Christians. The way we work the soil must spring from the biblical worldview. It should stem out from the conviction that God is sovereign over all of nature. He created it and He expects mankind to be stewards over it. Psalm 104 verse 14. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth. Isaiah 62 verse 4. No longer will they call you deserted or name your land desolate, but you will be called Yephe-zibah, and your land Behula, for the Lord will take delight in you, and your land will be married. We come to the F section, agricultural lessons from the first farmer, from God Himself. God has an enormous wealth of information for us on farming. To understand it in depth, what we need is a holistic theology, a theology that is God-centered and that treats man and the creation in the integrative manner that Scripture does. Farmers need to be sensitive to nature, related to land, decisive operators, well-integrated realists, and cooperators with God. Simultaneously, Christian ethics is required in agriculture to reconcile economy, ecology, energy, efficiency, environment, equity, and employment. Agriculture needs linkage with Christian spirituality. Creation accounts in the book of Genesis contain in their own symbolic and narrative language profound teachings about human existence and its historical reality. Pope Francis points out to three vital relationships found in nature that can assist us in creating agrarian theology. Laudato Si 66, human life is grounded in three fundamental, closely intertwined relationships with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth itself. According to the Bible, these three vital relations have been broken both outwardly and within us. This rupture is sin. The dilapidated condition of agriculture we are facing today can be the outcome of these broken relationships. Therefore, agriculture is about connections, one vertical to God, the other horizontal with humans and the rest of creation. In the natural world, roots and a proper connection to the soil symbolize the essence of agriculture. This is part of the vertical connection, God above, creatures below, and within the earth beneath our feet. Yet many creatures and humans too have lives characterized by the horizontal dimension. Agriculture is a vocation. The earth is God's farm. God was the first farmer who cultivated the Garden of Eden. The earth is the Lord's. To him belongs the earth with all that is within it. Thus God rejects every claim to absolute ownership. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me. Leviticus chapter 25. Next. God has created an agricultural system. In Genesis 2:19, God established man's dominion over nature by making man a word maker, giving man the responsibility of naming the animals. As man mimics God by using language, he is separated from the rest of creation as the maker of culture. Thus, in the Garden of Eden, the first farmer created the first couple. In response to worship, Adam and Eve are to create culture by cultivating both soil and soul. That's why it is called agriculture. The importance of man as culture maker is found in the language that we employ. Agriculture, cultivate the field, horticulture, cultivate the garden, and aquaculture, cultivate the water. Theologian Herman Bebbing wrote, culture in the broadest sense is the purpose for which God created man after his image, which includes not only the most ancient callings of hunting and fishing, agriculture and stock raising, but also trade and commerce and science and art. Farmers are cultivators, not only of the soil, but also of culture. They have their role in the building of nations as the societal mandate sends image bearers to the corners of the continents. The agriculturalists precede them, finding innovative ways to nurture the fruits of creation. Above all else, an agriculturalist or farmer is an ambassador of the kingdom of God. We must encourage the continuation of this profession of pastoral and agricultural witnesses. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, George Washington Carver, etc., etc. Farmers seeking to function from a biblical mind as it relates to agriculture is to apply biblical principles in his practice. Genesis 2:15 we read that the farmer is to be a steward of the land, Instead of destroying soil, he should work the farm in a way that leaves it more fertile for succeeding generations. This would speak against the slash and burn agriculture found in many developing nations and erosion of agricultural land found in others. This is illustrated in George Washington Carver's call for the farmer to be kind to the soil. He writes, "The farmer whose soil produces less every year is unkind to it in some way. That is, he is not doing by it what he should. He is robbing it of some substance it must have, and he becomes therefore a soil robber than a progressive farmer." Carver continues, "We must enrich our soil every year instead of merely depleting it. It is fundamental that nature will drive away those who sin against it."